Hi there, I'm Mabel Lam, and this is One in a Billion, Part 6 of our special series, True Colors. True Colors is about the color of our character, not our skin in times of crisis. How we respond reveals who we are, our values, our beliefs, and our sense of justice and fairness.
Asians like to keep their heads down, avoid attention that may be negative because of their own experience with people in power. And so people end up retreating, do what we need to do to survive. But by doing that, we are supporting and colluding with racism.
That is Dr. Mabel Lam, a clinical psychologist and a commissioner with the Asian American Commission, the AAC, a state agency in Boston that advocates for the rights of Asian American and Pacific Islanders. The AAC also celebrates their contribution to the state of Massachusetts. Asian Americans represent just over 7% of the almost 7 million people in Massachusetts, according to UMass Boston. 70% of these Asians are foreign-born. The term Asian American is a broad one. It does not expose the complexity and inequality among a host of Asian American subgroups in the state, such as Indian, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Korean, Filipino, and Japanese. Chinese Americans remain the single largest group within the Asian American community. It is rare that we as Asians in America confront our own unconscious bias against other communities of color. So when I came across the Asian American Commission's public statement urging us to examine our own anti-Black attitude, I found it refreshing, a positive step in the right direction.
If I'm with my friends and a friend says something that's anti-Black, say they make a crude joke, I don't want to just be complicit and stand there and laugh along. I want to actually stand up and speak up and educate them about why it's wrong. And I think this is what we're trying to do too, is to spark this conversation about reflecting on our own implicit bias.
That is Jenny Chang, the Executive Director of the Asian American Commission. In today's episode, we're talking about reflect and reach across. Here's our conversation. I want to begin the interview by asking each of you to take us back to that day in June when you published a public statement on behalf of the Asian American Commission of the state of Massachusetts in support of Black Lives Matter. So, Dr. Lam, what is the most salient point that resonates most deeply with you?
I think it's really to have a very bold statement how we can support Black Lives Matter. We need to be out there to do our part. Asian Americans tend to be very quiet and silent and not physically be out there. It is a risk. It's about risk-taking to make a statement of what we believe in and what we're advocating for. It's really about racism and take the broader view about racism, not individual community politics.
You mentioned risk, Dr. Lam. What did you have in mind when you say that?
You know, Asians like to keep their heads down, avoid attention that may be negative because of their own experience with people in power. So when you speak up, we may get bullied, we may be verbally abused for what we believe in, and so people end up retreating. But by doing that, we are enabling and supporting and colluding with racism.
How about you, Jenny?
I think what really resonated with me personally is the line about our stories and pains are interwoven, and how the Black community has fought alongside, shoulder to shoulder with Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You know, growing up as an Asian American here, I don't really hear that too often, that AAPIs have been on the forefront with Black and African American communities to fight for social justice. And I think that we both experience discrimination. I think all people come to do is kind of nuanced. We have to be able to empathize with each other's pains.
I grew up in the 60s and 70s in San Francisco, and in high school we had desegregation. So they were busing in Blacks from the Black community into our high school, and our high school were predominantly Asians, Chinese. And there were lots of fights, and even our principal got knifed by one of the kids.
Oh.
it was a really big tension between the Blacks and the Asian students. I never had any problems with the Black students, and because I was friends with them, my Chinese friends couldn't understand why I was doing that because they had their own prejudice. But it was really interesting how they were protecting me from other Asian students who said anything negative. They warned them, don't mess with Mabel, she's our girl. And they don't understand how come you can have this type of relationship. For me, it's so at a young age that you need to reach across, right? And get to know them and so that they know you. But a lot of Asian students didn't do that. And so it created this tension between the Black and the Asian students. It became territorial and the fighting, and it could have been resolved easily. It's really nice to see that now a lot of protesters of the younger generation, they're able to lift and push further for the government, for the U.S., to really take a good hard look at a lot of their policies that really is discriminatory.
So, Jenny, how about you? Were you able to relate to any aspect of what Dr. Lam was talking about in the 60s and 70s? And where did you grow up?
So I actually can't speak to the 60s and 70s. I actually wasn't born yet. Growing up in the 90s and 2000s, I think I was a little bit more isolated, whereas I didn't really see many Black and African American individuals in my upbringing. I was definitely nurtured to have an implicit bias towards the Black and African American communities.
Jenny, where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Hampshire, Concord, New Hampshire, actually. So my high school, my whole public school curriculum was very white European American.
Yes.
A very, very small population of people of color. So I never really had that exposure growing up. What I absorbed to understand about the people who didn't identify with the white European community, I got from media, I got from my family, and that gave me a very skewed perspective, I think.
What didn't you grow up with that you got from your friends and communities later on about racial tension, Jenny?
Honestly, it wasn't until I got to college. I went to UMass Boston. There I was able to take some ethnic studies classes where I really learned about different communities of color. And that's where I actually learned that AAPIs were actually alongside Black and African American communities during the civil rights movement.
Since that public statement you issued in June, what are some of the responses from the public? Any surprises?
We got a lot of support, but we also got some negative feedback. If you put it within context, it's a smaller group than the overwhelming support we got. Sometimes each group always have infighting, right? And because we're also diverse by age and also ethnic background.
Right. Who objected to the statement and why? What is the crux of the opposition?
Some of the Asian American individual communities and individuals, they were objecting that we acknowledge that within our Asian American communities, there are anti-Blackness, racial tension.
Are they wrong?
Yes, I think they're wrong.
Well, let me ask you, what do you hope to accomplish by acknowledging in this public statement that anti-Blackness exists in our Asian culture?
That's a powerful statement we made, and that is to really acknowledge our own biases, our own racism. No matter how open you are, you still may say something inadvertently that sounds very racist. It's wanting everyone to sort of acknowledge these biases, inadvertently contribute to the racism, and so that we should be really reflecting on ourselves.
Can you give me a context or something concrete to illustrate how that plays out in terms of the anti-Blackness bias within us? Jenny, do you want to offer your view?
Yeah, I was actually thinking, like, in the case where if I'm with my friends and a friend says something that's anti-Black, let's say they make a crude joke, I don't want to just be complicit and stand there and laugh along. I want to actually stand up and speak up and educate them about why it's wrong. And I think this is what we're trying to do too, is to spark this conversation about reflecting on our own implicit bias and to have these conversations, even though they're uncomfortable.
Is that quite prevalent in your experience, Jenny?
I think in my group of friends, I've been fortunate enough to have people who do align their values with my own. Even with my family, though, I've heard my father say things that are anti-Black. I've heard my brother say things that are anti-Black, and I've had these painful conversations, and I've had to at least try to converse with them, even though there might be a language barrier in the case of my father.
What are some of their complaints?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stereotype that my father has actually said that, Blacks are dirty, they're lazy, they aren't hardworking.
Right. These are the common complaints that we hear within our culture, isn't it? I constantly also have to speak up because I get angry myself, Jenny, when I hear blanket statements like that, because it's so not true.
Because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, I started to have a little bit of understanding about the civil rights movement. A lot of the Asian American students in college was discovering they have a voice and that they came together, they advocated. It's basically born out of the Black movement with the Black Panthers, where they were, fighting oppression. We definitely benefited from that because for college, they have the equal opportunity, affirmative action was set up, and a lot of the Asians were able to go to college because of that.
So were you saying that, Dr. Lam, were Asians barred from entering college? Were they denied the rights of access to higher education?
Well, it's more subtle than that. We were juniors in high school. All of a sudden, our English teacher started passing out the SAT booklet. All he said was, if you're interested in college, fill out the information. You need to take this test. 5 minutes, and that was it. We didn't even know what it was.
You were not well prepared for it.
Not at all. Very different from, like the more well-affluent white high schools. Because I went to high school where it's predominantly Asians.
Is that public school?
Yes, it's public school.
In San Francisco in the 70s?
Yeah, it was called Galileo High School.
Okay.
You have teachers who don't tell you anything. Guidance counselor don't encourage you to go to college. So if you're talking about racism for Asians, we got them from day one we enter school. So that's where all the racism, happened.
As a child, Dr. Lam, you did not feel it is your place to fight. You did not know your right. Am I correct?
Right. No, I didn't.
And your role models were the Black people in your school?
They're the one who teach me how to fight.
How were you, Dr. Lam, able to move through not just college, but higher education with no or little access to information?
I was lucky. One of my mentors in college is a Black professor. She was the one who literally made me live in her house for about 1 to 2 months and crank out all the applications. And she helped me with the statement. So if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have gotten where I am now. And yes, in my life, I can tell you there are a number of Asian women, Black women who helped me through different parts of my life.
Well, that's amazing. How about you, Jenny? How is your own story of gaining the rights and the confidence to speak up and reach across the aisle, so to speak, racially?
My experience somewhat echoes Dr. Lam's, whereas my parents were also immigrants here who didn't speak any English. So, things like applying to college were so foreign to me, and I felt like I had no support. It wasn't really until I did get to college eventually where I found people of color who taught me more about civic engagement and taught me more about the social justice movement and encouraged me to speak up and create these ripple effects to continue these legacies.
Well, so it sounds like you, Jenny, and Dr. Lam, you both have benefited from your alliance, your friendship with people of color, from the Black people to Hispanics and maybe other groups as well?
Certainly for me, it is.
Yeah, definitely for me too. I think, without those experiences, I wouldn't really be where I am right now.
Do you feel that you have benefited from white privilege or model minority myth, Jenny?
I think privilege is a spectrum, and I think, as an Asian American, I don't have to be afraid of going outside and getting gunned down or even choked to death when I walk in the streets, when I jog outside, or even when I sleep on my bed. And I think that is a privilege that, unfortunately, a lot of Black communities have to worry about.
How about you, Dr. Lam? In what ways do you feel like your upbringing and your current status with a PhD allow you to benefit from white privilege?
For my PhD, going out to the community, if I choose to use my title, I get a little bit more respect. But if I don't, then they'll see me as just another Asian woman. So one of the privileges that I can use it when I really need it versus when I don't need to use it. A lot of people can't do that. And I think as a model minority is, yes, I went to school, did everything right, able to attain what I have. But at the same time, what people don't understand is the era where I grew up, girls did not go to college. All my friends that I grew up with, no one did. They just had a community college and they worked in the office. So part of my minority worked in ways that teachers took notice of me and noticed that I was smart, that I was able to do more. For the white teachers, they feel like, oh, she's worthwhile to take notice and mentor.
Well, you showed potential, right?
Right, but it's also up to them.
Right. Now, in a lot of big cities like New York or LA, San Francisco, there have been reports of underlying tension between Asian and Blacks, in particular in small businesses.
There are tensions. It's business, right? They're all trying to make a living.
Right.
So there's that economic piece. Then on the other level is because of their own stereotypes about each other. Black community, well, the Asians are selling all these pirated stuff from China. So you never know, is it real what they're selling you? And then, of course, the other side, they'll look, well, you don't know, are they going to put some drugs in what you buy? Because they do a lot of drugs in the community. So these are all the stereotypes.
Right.
It keeps playing out and it creates those tensions.
Putting into context of the current atmosphere in which we find ourselves, the police brutality and the treatment of Black people by police, as well as the overall system in America, is what we're trying to look at, where are areas that can be improved. And it is in that context that the Asian American Commission issued a statement that it's very bold and brave in looking at where and how we as Asians may have also play a part in sustaining or contributing to a system that keeps Black people down and out. Am I right?
Yes, I think you're right.
And what do we do now as a group, as Asians, as we are reading your statement calling on us to prioritize our support for Black lives? In what ways may certain groups of Asians feel slighted or ignored in their particular struggles against racism and xenophobia?
Mabel, you're right in saying that, all communities of color, not just white people, not just Black people, but everybody has a part in this fight. It comes with accepting that, you might have implicit bias, that you might have friends and family who have implicit bias. Even though you have friends and family that might be marching alongside Black communities, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are in full solidarity with them.
Being allies of the Black community, is there something specific that you want to push for that benefit both groups, the Blacks and the Asian?
As an Asian American community, is to actually have collaborations with Black community organizations. We often work in silos, so being able to open ourselves up to other perspectives and being able to find ways to collaborate and to have conversations that may have never happened before.
Are there any initiatives that you're working on right now with the Black communities?
So something that we've been thinking about is trying to work more closely with the Black and Latino caucus at the State House and just trying to take their guidance and leadership as to how we as an API community can support them.
How does that focus take your eyes off of addressing some of the pressing needs of specific Asian groups that perhaps are less educated and from poorer countries that are trying to get your attention to create programs for them?
One of the things that we've been pushing for is for Western Mass, where there are a large group of Asians out there, but they are so totally neglected and they have no voice.
Who are these Asian groups? Can you specify?
Laotian, Hmong, Cambodians, Nepalese, Bhutanese. So they're more on the Western Mass area.
Right.
They don't even have any infrastructure to allow them to have a voice. So part of the Asian American Commission has been to provide resources, and we were able to hire a part-time coordinator out there specific to work and coordinate and to also on the grassroots level find out, making connections of these communities and see what are their needs so that we can provide what little money we can in providing programming, support.
The large majority of them are immigrants, probably most recently, like 10, 20 years.
So how big is that group that you have just outlined?
Well, according to the 2010 census, there's only about 425 of the Bhutanese community out there.
People who are immigrants from Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Hmong, and Bhutan. What are the needs there that you are now taking on?
All the community groups out there are very grassroots and they aren't as established. They don't have funds. So as a commission, we're trying to help them out and understand how we can support them to build this infrastructure.
Our chairperson is a refugee and she's Laotian. And so she's been doing a lot of pro bono work out there to help organize.
More recently, we actually had a lot of programming related to COVID-19. We also featured a ton of different webinars where we had topics related to history, Islamophobia, and having conversations with the Boston Teacher Union president to talk about opening up in the fall and how Asian American students could be protected. Similarly, in the fall, we also have an API Civil Rights Forum that we do every year. And that's really just an opportunity to introduce people from various sectors throughout New England, actually, to talk about different issues that affect the communities, from civic engagement, political work, to human trafficking.
Why did you get involved in the AAC work, Jenny and Dr. Lam? What's been really difficult for you?
Well, we are appointed, all the commissioners. As a psychologist, I really wanted to use my platform to promote mental health. There are the serious mental illness like schizophrenia, being bipolar. There are helicopter parents that put a lot of pressure on the kids, and so they end up with such huge anxiety and depression, and there's a high rate of suicide among Asian teens, especially for females. And then you got domestic violence. From their country of origin, it's allowable. But here, in the U.S., we're talking about it is not allowable.
In what ways are any of these mental health problems a result or side effect of racism or xenophobia?
It's a lot of it. That's why there's such a huge increase in anxiety and depression. We always talk about microaggression, racist attitudes, verbal assault. When you get it day in, day out, all the time, you develop this sense of helplessness. You speak up, someone will invalidate what you said. And that is a form of microaggression.
Well, you are definitely doing great work. And I'm just going to ask one last question. What is the most gratifying aspect of having published this statement reflecting your values and your beliefs?
I'm happy that it sparked a nationwide conversation. I think these are painful conversations to have, and I'm glad that it is getting attention, because I think we can't be complicit and we can't stand by and not acknowledge that anti-practice does exist in the community. I'm actually happy that people are willing to put the effort in and to have these discussions.
Yeah, me too. If we don't speak up, and this is such an important, pivotal time in history, what does that say about us as Asian Americans?
Thank you, Dr. Mabel Lam and Jenny Chiang with the Asian American Commission. In our next episode of True Colors, she's a West Point graduate. She served combat duty in Afghanistan. She's an entrepreneur with a Harvard MBA.
It just went really fast. I don't think I felt that angry or confused. It made sense to me why they would do it. Just want to move on and figure out the next steps that you have to do to survive.
That is Kimberly Jung. She was an engineering student at MIT when she had to evacuate the campus last spring because of the spread of COVID-19. How did she figure out her next steps, not just for herself, but for COVID patients who need ventilators? That is our next episode, Mission After Mission, in 2 weeks. 1 in a Billion is
Brian Latwinowicz,
Yvette Yu, Maggie Shi,
Leah Yen Jarrett.
And our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy. Let us know if you want to join our team of volunteers, help us plan events, pitch a story. Just go to our website, oneinaBillionVoices.org, and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.